Well, good morning. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And this morning it's January the 19th, 2023, a little after 11 a.m. And I see we have some people in the chat room already. Big show last night. Really enjoyed it. Got a lot out of it. It's funny, you sometimes you have a big plan and you want to focus on a certain area. But sometimes it's easier as a presenter to just kind of let it flow and it works. Tossing out a hot potato at the beginning like, hey, what do you think is going on in Antarctica? And it led to some really in-depth analysis, I think, that's really worthwhile. So thank you to Bill Taylor and to David Cranmer Underdown for a fun show last night. And you know I think I'm feeling kind of between melancholy and just a little flicker of hope. There's always that pilot light of hope that's going on. As we see things crumble that really should have crumbled long ago. For instance, Jacinda Ardern, the soon to be gone Prime Minister of New Zealand, who has been responsible for some of the most vicious attacks on personal freedom anywhere in the world. And her rhetoric is just astoundingly evil. Um, as I'm afraid to say, but I will say she looks terrible. She looks like somebody who has been through hell. And that's the way she sounded when she resigned. She sounded like she just couldn't take it anymore. She had to look after her health. Well, I think her health is most important, and so is the health of the world. So she didn't think of that when she was imposing her totalitarian lockdowns. So, Trudeau next, I hope, says Zaganostro. Good morning, Zag, and thanks for being here. Yeah, that guy, he's got to go. Oh man, uh, I just I don't see how they're going to overcome this unless they pull another big thing or actually go to World War III in Europe. But that's what I was trying to talk to uh, this week, and many, both with Harley and last night. I'm trying to explore the idea that this this is a war to conquer the whole world, and it's not going to be over until either they win or they are completely defeated. Those of you that have studied the Civil War in the past, you understand that, as the war progressed, it got more and more costly in human lives. Armies got bigger, the battles got bigger and more deadly, with 20, 30,000 men killed, and I mean, just destroying the country, destroying the future, which is in the hands of the youth. And when it came down to it, to win the war, Lincoln relied upon General Grant. And this is exactly what General Grant's policy was, that he was never going to end the war until he completely won it. And that meant that when a battle was over, he followed up. He sent his troops after the rebels, as they were trying to get away. He would then initiate another battle and another battle and another battle, and he did not really think about casualties. He was only thinking about winning. And honestly, that's the only way to win, is to, be a Napoleon, be someone who knows that your soldiers are there to be used as necessary to win the war. But with that relentless drive to win at all costs, on the one hand, we're glad that we had him because we have now a still united country that is still capable of being sovereign and still capable of overcoming these traps and burdens that we've been saddled with. But that method of war is what's going on now in Ukraine. Just as Lincoln and Grant made up their mind that they were not going to stop the war until they won. So you have the World Economic Forum, you have the City of London, you have the Prime Minister of England, you have of Britain, you have the President of the United States, you have respected world leaders, you have Ursula von der Leyen of the EU, and all of the corporate power that's represented at the World Economic Forum that's going on right now. All of that is behind the idea that we cannot compromise, we cannot negotiate, we cannot stop, we must continue until we have won the war for Ukraine. And to win that war, they have defined it as Russia out of Ukraine and Crimea back in the hands of the Kiev government. So, and American people have just been fooled into thinking that we're not at war. Okay. We've been at war ever since World War II. We have never stopped being at war as a nation because we think like we're at war. We're thinking that way. We're thinking, we have to expend this treasure or these bodies or this environment, or we just have to do this because if we don't, then, ultimately we're going to lose us against them. That is this mindset. And speaking of mindsets, it is in studying the Jesuit material that we understand or get a glimpse of the mindset of people that will take that attitude. Like Al Gore. Did you see Al Gore complaining? Like, I mean, he was just going berserk about how all of these problems that we have are not going to be solved, unless we uh, do the Davos World Economic Forum plan and global warming. He's all about it, and he blames it on climate change. You know, all this all this stuff that's happening. It's all on climate change. And he's so angry, angry, angry that we will not go along with his ideas. And the same thing, you see Jens Stoltenberg complaining, this is going to be awful. We can't let this happen. What if the authoritarian governments win? I got news for you, sir. You are the authoritarian government, and we hope that you lose. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the NATO, if it ever had any use, went out of lost its use and when the Soviet Union was destroyed, defeated, dismembered, and sold off. That was why we had a NATO. We don't need it anymore. But they need it. The ones that have grabbed control from us, the people that pay the bills. Pardon me. Hello, everyone in the chat. And hey, Deborah Johnson reminding me to ask everyone to hit the like button. Uh, Never really have encouraged that myself, but it's time to start stepping up. We are going to need to expand our message in many ways, and we need your help to raise the visibility of our work here at McDuff Lives. We're working on a lot of things at once. We want to push it out there as far as we can. I'm adding new channels just about every week. I'm going to have a Rumble soon. I will um, be working with some consultants about um, improving things at BitChute and other opportunities. Perhaps I might go on Brighteon, but we need to get people organized. And well, aside from me organizing, and my wife is Marcia is going to be helping me a lot with that. She is um, working on the podcasts, and I hope you've checked out our podcast at McDuff Live Podcasts at Spotify and other podcast places. We've got about six of them up yet. We're working on one right now. And she's also going to be helping me with some graphics and trying to make the show a little bit more friendly to the eye and uh, more good content. So, in essence, I'm trying to make a bigger splash this year. I'm trying to make my father's story your story. I want people to really latch on to the idea that if we see what they did to Macduff, you'll see what they're doing to the country. Hello, everyone. Wintai, Jerome, very good to have you guys here. Thank you, Sheriff. Yeah, and that is my Patreon that Deborah put up there. Patreon, when well, never mind. I had a kind of a meltdown about fundraising a year and a half ago when things kind of went south with a number of folks. It was just one of those crises you have to go through, but I can't leave it alone anymore. With my wife retiring, the income is important. So, um, you know, chip in $5 a month if you can over at Patreon, and I do appreciate everyone that does. And if you can't, that's fine. You're always welcome. I have no desire to take your Social Security or anything like that. But if you can afford it, uh, enough said. Okay, Marie, you're right. I need to leave the link for the podcast down below, and I will do that after the show. So I follow some of the actual sit reps on at Ukraine and watch what's going on. And the big story is the human cost. Uh, these Each side is losing hundreds of guys a week, if not thousands. And on the Ukrainian side, they're losing a lot more than the Russians. That seems to be quite clear. And the front line, of course, it's active in different places at different times, but the sheer amount of artillery that is being fired is just unbelievable. It's like World War One or World War Two all over again. If you even just look at a still image of some of the ground, it looks like the moon. It's pockmarked everywhere with shell holes, and we don't hear about the casualties, but we know that they're very, very high. And so this is destroying Ukraine in terms of its potential as a nation. Not only does it pull apart the disparate cultures of the Russian and the Ukrainians generally, and Certainly, there's more divisions, there are more cultures than just those two. But if Ukraine was ever going to make it as a nation, it needed to blend the Russian and the Ukrainians back together so that they might go to different churches or go to different festivals, but they're still citizens of the same country, just like me and somebody that belongs to a church that I don't belong to. Why should we fight over nationality if we have a good country going? It doesn't matter what your religion is. That's the American plan. That's what President Kennedy said. That's what I believe. And that's what we have to have. We have to have freedom to be a Russian or to be a Ukrainian and still live in the same country. But that huge division and the emotional cost of hate. And now the loss of life is just so awful, so tremendous that no matter what Mr. Zelensky wants, the country's not going to survive. It's just devastated. And so we see that Zelensky, he's a front man, right, for some oligarchs and the deal between some nations and some oligarchs and some Bidens and some, you know, all of that stuff masquerading as a good Christian, you know, NATO loving country. It's all so false. Well, the downing of the helicopter yesterday that happened just outside of Kiev, where the not only the defense minister, but the entire upper staff of the defense department of Ukraine was killed in a helicopter crash, which apparently, you know, might very well have been a Stinger missile that hit it. And that indicates, of course, some kind of dispute within the Ukrainian leadership. But in the middle of a war, do you want to lose your defense minister and his whole staff? That's bad. And every day we're looking for the Russians to break through here or there, and they don't. It just drags on and on and on. And, another 100, 200, 300 men are killed, not to mention those that are maimed and suffer permanent injuries. It's horrible. And but in terms of defeating the empire, the totalitarian nightmare that's looming over us all, that wants to just kind of descend on us and get into our brains and put little chips in us and, make sure we stay within the lines. As far as I can tell, the Ukrainians are all for the empire, and the Russians are fighting against it. And I'm against the empire. I say sic semper tyrannis. No tyrants. I don't want any tyrants. I don't care if they have NATO uniforms or Russian uniforms. I don't want any tyrants. We don't accept tyrants. We cannot accept tyrants. And that's what, Jacinda Ardern is or was, a tyrant. So I don't have any great love of Russia or Putin or any of the institutions that are represented by the Russian government. And matter of fact, I'm quite troubled by the Russian government in many ways. And part of it is their seeming adherence to the World Health Organization's plans and a clear adoption of the same mRNA vaccines that we study so carefully here. And so I just stuck because I think, like, who can I root for? All I want is the war over. And the ones that want the war to continue, well, that's the empire, because that is, the the war will go on. Oh man, that reminds me of my mother. Um, she really liked certain actors, and one of them was oh, I'm sorry, I won't think of his name now, but he oh, I think it was the guy in Jaws, the guy that's yeah, it was the guy in Jaws, the one that's the boat captain. Somebody knows who he is, a great actor. Anyway, he was playing the German commander of the Germans in the movie, the Battle of the Bulge, and at the end of the Battle of the Bulge, uh, when the Germans have lost and the uh, German soldiers are kind of, you know, walking back towards Germany, with defeated, crashed tanks and everything all around them, everything flames everywhere, and they're walking home, and this colonel's sergeant says, finally, we will go home. The war will be over. And the colonel, the German Nazi colonel, says, "No, no, the best thing possible will happen." And the sergeant says, "What is that, sir?" And the colonel says, "The war will go on." And so it has. So it has in secret. They went to Argentina. They went to South America. They went to Egypt. You know, they went to Spain. They went all around the world, and they worked together in harmony to create and facilitate what's happening right now. Not to mention the infiltration during the paperclip era in the 50s and 60s of all these Ukrainians, as documented in that great book that I read by Christopher Simpson called Blowback. Here it is. Now that's one thing I want to do. I want to get my readings of this book back up on the internet so people can pick up on that, because I'm telling you, this one sets us up for today really, really well with the planned importing of East Europeans. And that means, ones that were with the death squads and ones that worked with the Nazis in different countries, from the Baltics to Poland to, you know, all of the middle and southern European countries. Those people that were brought here secretly and became political leaders, started little groups like, Lithuanians for civilization, or just organizing so that they become a voting bloc that can support this or that. And like in Chicago in particular, with um, the Catholic Church and Marcinkus. Anyway, the amount of these Banderites and Pravi sectors and others that came over here has never been accounted for. And as I was talking with Wayne Madsen down in Florida 2 years ago, um, and asked him, what did he think was the files that my father was assigned to review, the 68,000 files that we talk about in my book about my dad, where Hoover assigned him to be the head of a team of 24, I think, people, agents and secretaries, to go through 68,000 application files, very top secret. And I think these were people that the CIA had brought into the country and wanted to get legalized or wanted to bring into the country under a green card type of a status. And in order to do that, as I learned from Annie Jacobson's book, Operation Paperclip, that J. Edgar Hoover had put his thumb down on the process and said, I want to vet anybody that you want to come in to the CIA. And so they had a procedure where the FBI would vet these applicants, applicants for residency, for a green card, for a work permit, 68,000 files, 1952 to 54, I believe. It's just right the same time that that Christopher Simpson is talking about bringing in all of these Ukrainians into the United States, and they have arms caches and they have organization and they have communications. And, to what extent is this war really a world war already, where people like our Secretary of State, have Ukrainian roots? Robert Shaw, thank you. Hmm. Well, changing the subject, I'm really interested in enjoying considering this book very very thoroughly. Why the CIA Killed JFK and Malcolm X: The Secret Drug Trade in Laos by John Kerner. And along those lines, I happened across a very very interesting Department of State memo, which I want to bring to Mark's attention. I think you're here, right, Mark? Well, this is on the question of Symington. Senator Symington in 1969 had a subcommittee on Laos. He was studying Laos. And of course, my theme here is the secret drug trade in Laos may have been the ultimate reason for the Vietnam War and for the assassinations of the people noted. At any rate, here is this memorandum from the Department of State dated September 30th, 1969. And it was only declassified in 2006. And it is addressed to the secretary, and it is called Meeting of Kissinger Committee on Symington Subcommittee. A meeting was held in the Situation Room at the White House, chaired by Dr. Kissinger, to go over the testimony which should not under any circumstances be divulged to the Symington Subcommittee. This is the subcommittee on Laos, okay? Present at the meeting, in addition to yourself and the undersigned, were the Attorney General, Mr. Mitchell, the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Laird, the Director of the CIA, Mr. Helms, and Messrs. Ehrlichman, Bellew, Crow, and Allen of the White House staff. After considerable discussion of tactics to be employed in reducing the amount of damage to U.S. foreign policy and national security which might come from divulging secrets of which Senator Symington and his staff were already cognizant, it was the general consensus of the meeting that it would be best to invoke executive privilege on divulgence of nuclear deployments anywhere in the world. Wait a minute, nuclear deployments? I thought we were talking about Laos. And here's where I think that Mark Kulak has a very good insight, and that is that if they want to hide something, all you got to do is call it a nuclear program, and then suddenly it just disappears. So this is where I think maybe they hid the Laos wars under the Atomic Energy Commission or something. Why not? They had an order that said you have to have plausible deniability. That means you got to hide, and you've got to hide it in sneaky ways. So this is just a theory that I have, but I'm going to read some more, and I think you might be persuaded that this theory holds water. Therefore, although careful consideration was given to the State Department's outline of a possible alternative tactic to testify in very restricted executive session only to senators, members of the committee, and with only one copy of the transcript, on balance, Dr. Kissinger, the Attorney General, Mr. Helms, and Secretary Laird felt that executive privilege should be invoked as indicated above. Mr. Ehrlichman vehemently agreed. There was also general agreement that the president's directive that no CIA representatives testify on Laos was a sound position, likewise to be protected by executive privilege. However, Dr. Kissinger recognized that the hearings on Laos could not simply be swept under the rug by invoking secrecy and the refusal to discuss the subject at all. Something, he said, has to be said about Laos. It was agreed that the undersigned would expedite the interdepartmental analysis of materials requested by the Symington Subcommittee on Laos, organized in a matrix according to developing degrees of releasability, sensitivity, and secrecy, and that Kissinger group would meet again not later than Tuesday, October 7th. There was general agreement that subordinate personnel should not be permitted to serve as witnesses, and that probably the only witness of state would be Ambassador Sullivan, and for Defense Secretary Laird. I suggested that Ambassador Sullivan attend the meeting when Laos materials would be analyzed as to category of sensitivity, and this was agreed. This is the ambassador to Laos, William Sullivan. He has the same name as a very important second in command at the FBI, William Sullivan, different guy. This William Sullivan is a diplomat, and he has been given authority to run the secret war in Laos. So whatever he says is going to be, he's going to be very, very circumspect. So this memo, a State Department memo, is saying that the White House and Kissinger, in particular, are not going to let the Symington Committee know anything about what's going on in Laos. And I think that is another uh, piece of evidence that comes into the equation of, yeah, I think there's a lot behind this idea that there was this secret drug trade in Laos. And of course, no, how could we not mention the book TDY, in which Doug Valentine, the great scholar, the great author of so many books on Vietnam, the military, the drug wars, everything, has identified my father as the man who put together the mission to do what? To go into Laos, to the Plain of Jars, to make a video and still photos, recording sound of a drug deal that they knew was going to happen between a CIA representative and a Van Pal drug representative. And that book, TDY, really should be, here it is. Everybody should know this story, because it is the story of a team within the Pentagon that wanted to stop the CIA's drug trade. Where? In Laos. So yeah, what I was saying last night, I think it is, I want to repeat it. The point of having that drug trade in Laos and the Golden Triangle generally for the CIA was not to make money. Just like, as Mark Kulak often says about the the pharma and the vaccines and everything, it's not to make money. No, it's to achieve something else. In the vaccine, they're doing research. They want to know more and more details about us, and they're subjecting us to these things to see what happens. In the case of the uh, the drug war, They tell us that it's the communists, and we have to go out and fight and die to stop communism. But it wasn't. It was just in order for them to set up this drug trade. Again, the drug trade was not set up to make money. That's where I think an analysis really can go awry because, who cares if a few CIA moguls made $1 billion? I don't care. It doesn't change my life. But what does change my life is knowing that it's probably possible for me to walk out my door and walk down the street hollering, anybody got some fentanyl? And somebody would come out and say, here, come and talk to me. I got some. Because it's everywhere. And this is the war, you know, this is the war where you don't see the bodies. Dennis Kelleher's poem I read the other day. And it just keeps on resonating with me. They are tearing it all down, what was built when the soldiers came home. After fighting against the fascist tide, 40 million of them fought and died from Moscow to the street of London, from China to the Straits of Gibraltar. And, that greatest generation that we talk so highly about, and, Tom Brokaw and all the big, talking heads on TV are like always, oh, greatest generation, band of brothers, love them all. Fine. Then preserve their heritage, preserve the world that they created for us, the ones that our fathers put together and mothers, our families, put that, don't destroy everything they fought for. But that's the thing. This whole new world is going to be completely destructive of everything that our fathers and grandfathers and ancestors fought for. It's impossible for it to keep going the way it's going. The sheer destruction of topsoil, destruction of trees, the destruction of water, of rivers, of clean water. I saw today the freshwater fish are uh, poisoned with some chemical that's like it was from Children's Health Defense. They said it's called the forever chemical, something that gets into the freshwater lakes and thereby the fish. Um, you think this isn't intentional, by the way? That's what's so funny about an Al Gore is he thinks he can fool us into thinking that all this stuff is just happening. It's climate change. Oh no, it's changing. Oh no, we have to react. We better throw some money at it. No, the world is the earth is being destroyed. This mining that's going on, this mining for these rare earths that they need to make their super duper computer things, is killing people, lives, children, everybody around it. Um, Spoke to a lady a couple months ago. She was a Navajo. We don't have very many people up here in Maryland that are from down there in Arizona, and I thought, well, I'd like to get to know her, and I started talking to her. She's about my age. She has lung cancer from the uranium mines that they mine down there on the reservation or next to it, and it gets the dust. They don't control the dust, so it's all over the people, and she has lung cancer because of that. The people on the left that are environmentalists are right. I agree with you that this is terrible, but you're not looking for the right. You're not looking at the cause. You're letting yourself being diverted, and to look at the shiny thing and talk about Orange Man, and you know you got to get past it. You think you're the smartest bulb on the porch, but maybe you're not. I think Lyndon LaRouche really did amazing work on trying to expose history and the economic principles that really lie behind a nation's success or failure. And the idea basically that the American Revolution was us separating ourselves from the old world's money system and saying we don't want to be part of that um, fractional reserve, trickle down, um, deceitful monetary policy where everything can be manipulated by tightening the money supply or adding paper money. It's exactly where we're at. We fought to get away from that because that was what was going on even back then. They knew how to manipulate the financial system. The Rothschilds, Nathan Rothschild, the whole story of the BCCI comes from the British East India Company, and that goes back to 1600. So they know how to use financial schemes to rip everybody off. And we tried to get away from that, and we did for a while. But then here comes, you know, the Aaron Burr. Here comes the Jakob Schiff, and here comes the Synarchists with Mr. Uh, Joseph Bonaparte, and the beginnings of the secret police and the FBI. All of this is pulling us back into the European system, and we don't want to be there. We never did. But in order to get out of it now, you know, we got to get out of NATO. We got to get out of these military commitments around the world and come back home and take care of ourselves, take care of our old people. I put in a word for my grandma, my dad's mother. We call her grandma. We never knew exactly how old she was. She was had limited education, but she was one of the first women to become a manager in a department store. She worked at a department store called O'Malley's in New York City and commuted there from Connecticut. And so she was, a working mother, uh, divorced from Tom Sr. And her husband, Frank Coakley, was a flyer in the Army Air Force in World War II, and he got emphysema. And she always said that it was from some chemicals that he breathed when he was flying in the India, Burma, China theater. And I can imagine them, dumping some chemicals or poison, to try to, uh, you know, win the war, poison the Japanese or whatever they might have been doing. But, nobody's ever been able to prove that that's how he got the emphysema, but it was bad. And, the last few years of his life, I did know him. We uh, visited them a couple times up in New Haven. And, when he died, that was it for her. She only had Social Security from then on. My dad was gone. He didn't have, he was dead 30 years before she was. So, this is what happens to the mothers of our soldiers and our military people and our CIA guys, everybody, the ones that die early, who takes care of their mothers? Um, you know, we did what we could for grandma, but it wasn't much with us, me in college and my mother just working at a fairly low wage job. We did what we could. We had a nurse come in once a week and That was about it. But why can't a country take care of uh, the people that have spent their lives working and now they need the help? Why can't we do that instead of trying to support this nutcase Zelensky over in Ukraine? And I got one more thing to say while I'm on a soapbox here, and that is, where is the moral leadership? Our country can't survive without moral leadership. The whole idea of our country is that we respect moral ideas. We know right from wrong. We have a conscience. We have a sense of what is our community about. And we have a sense of knowing how to deal with people if they get out of line or create problems. But if all of this that has been built up, over 200 and some years is just going to turn into another branch of the great empire, then we've failed. We've failed ourselves. We failed our parents and our grandparents, and we failed the founding generation. We cannot let this happen. We cannot let this happen. And so that's why I think this poem, it ends so well. Blame the Russian bear now. He's not in the fold. While they busy themselves running after the usual fool's gold, and they tear the world apart piece by piece. Greed, the only deity we worship in the church, fear driving the engine on the altar of our needs, praying in the darkness that loads of money set us free. And slowly and surely they are tearing it down. The masters of the universe, the Eton educated clowns, who know not where they're going because they think they're already there, with pockets full of money and their 1,000-yard stare. They are tearing down the community. They are ripping out its heart. They think they have immunity, but the dead and returnees set the mark. When they marched off to war, they knew what they were fighting for, a vision of the future where the fascist walked no more. Now they are trying to tear it down. What was built when the soldiers came home after defeating the fascist tide? Do you think their sons and grandsons are going to run and hide? Well, that's our show for today. The mission is to defeat the deep state, to win back our sovereignty, to win back our human rights, and to protect the infirm, the elderly, and to not be alone, but to regrow our communities and head back to the true path set for us in 1776. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here. I look forward to talking to you all in the chat tomorrow at 11 a.m. And look, keep checking in at screamingospreys.com and over at Patreon. I'll put a link up to the podcasts so you can easily hook up on your podcast service with McDuff Lives Podcast.